Thank you all for joining us. We have an excellent webinar ahead for you today. We are talking 802.11 management frames. We got Tuomas, we got Jim. Eric will speak a little bit later. And with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing and let Tuomas take it away.
Okay, yeah, so here's a slide about me. So my name is Tuomas Aaltonen. I've been at SevenSignal for the last 10 years now. So I'm a senior support engineer. I live in Helsinki, Finland, which is known by its forests and lakes and saunas. I'm joining today's session from London, from a hotel room. So hopefully the Wi-Fi is stable enough so that I can go through all the slides without any interruptions. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you wanna connect. So Heather can probably drop the link to LinkedIn if needed. Okay, let's go to next slide. So here's the agenda for today. So I'll give you a general overview of management frames in 802.11 network, and then we talk about different types of management frames that we have, and what do they service and what's their role. So why these frames are needed in Wi-Fi networks, and then we'll dive into some of the common frame types that are out there. So we'll look into what type of information these data frame, sorry, not data frame, but these management frames actually have. Here's a brief overview of management frames. So there's three main types of frames in 802.11. So management frame is today's topic, but then we have also control and data frames. So those are the two other main types of frames. And of course, all these three serve an important role in Wi-Fi network, but these management frames, their role is to make sure clients and access points can understand each other. So making sure that the client knows the limitations of the access point and the access point knows the limitations of the client, and they can negotiate then, you know, all the data rates and the channels together to speak the same language. And that is why these frames are always transmitted with the legacy data rate, which was also the question in the beginning of the webinar. So on 2.4 gigahertz band, it would be either 11B or 11G rate. And on the 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz band, it will be, well, in the 5 gigahertz band, it will be 11A rate. And so all the clients should understand these legacy rates. Even, you know, the oldest, 20-year-old devices would understand, 11B rates. So that means if the management frames are sent with that frame, all stations, like clients and APs, can understand that. These frames are usually transmitted only on the primary channel of the access point. So it's good to be aware of that. So on the 5 gigahertz band, if you have an access point using channel bonding, maybe you have 40 megahertz wide channel in use, that means the access point only sends these management frames on the primary channel of the access point, and the bonded channel, it wouldn't send these frames. So that's usually what happens, but there are some cases where these frames can be also duplicated on the all sub channels, even if the channel bonding is used. So these frames are transmitted with the lowest enabled basic rate. By default, that's 1 meg per second on the 2.4 gigahertz band and 6 megabits per second on 5 and 6 gigahertz bands. And this can also have an impact to how your Wi-Fi network performs. I talked about code channel interference and management frames in my previous webinar. So if you want to watch that, there's some information about how these management frames and these low data rates can have a negative impact to your Wi-Fi network. Also, you need to be aware that these management frames are signed unencrypted. So anyone with the Wi-Fi adapter can listen these frames and see everything, and that can be in some cases can be used in attacks like denial of service attacks. But you can use management frame protection, so that also encrypts some parts of the management frames. So these are different subtypes of management frames. You can see, some of these are probably quite known, like beacon frame and authentication and deauthentication frames. Then we have association frames and reassociation. We have probe requests and response, and we have action frames, and then two other frame types you'll see there that are grayed out. I'm not going to talk about those in this webinar. Those are less rare, like ATIM, for instance, is only used in ad hoc mode when access point is not even in use. So it's when like a peer-to-peer connection between two clients. And yeah, let's go to our next slide, which is going to be about beacon frames. So that's the a network advertisement frame. So you can see there the lighthouse on the right-hand side with the Wi-Fi icon there. In this case, a pretty stormy weather, could be interference, and that may have an impact also to your beacon frames if there's a lot of noise coming from other devices. But this network advertisement frame is or beacon frame is just giving all the surrounding stations, clients, IPs, information about its presence. So the access point advertises itself, asking, okay, if you want to join me, here I am. And all these clients, when if you turn on a Wi-Fi radio on your phone or laptop, you'll see a list of networks, list of Wi-Fi networks, and that's a result of receiving beacon frames from different channels. These frames are broadcasted every 102 milliseconds by default. Most access point vendors have this as a default setting. You can change it in some rare cases. You can change it, but over 95% of the time it's this default 102 milliseconds, these beacon frames are then helping clients to connect to the network, and as well, if a client is already connected and associated to an access point, it helps clients to roam, because the clients get more information about the AP, the signal strength, and so on and so forth. And you sometimes hear a word passive scanning, and that's referring to listening beacons. The other one is, of course, active scanning, which is referring to sending a probe request. So here's content of the beacon frame. This is not all. This is just part of the beacon frame, but there's a lot of information. So if you run a packet capture, open that capture file in your Wireshark, for instance, and look into one of the beacon frames, this information can be found there. So SSID name and access point name, that's pretty basic. Of course, we need to know, to which network this access point belongs, access point name, not probably quite often used by the client itself, but can be used to identify the access point, rather than using the MAC address. Then we have data rates, the HT and VHT information. So that tells the client, okay, I'm an access point, I support these and these data rates. Whether the access point supports 802.11k or 802.11r, that can help the client to roam. So in that case, you would look for RM-enabled capabilities or mobility domain information element from the beacon. If they are present in the beacon, that means that BSS or the access point supports these 802.11 amendments. We have DTIM, which is telling clients how often they need to wake up to listen a beacon when they are in a sleep mode. So in some cases, if you have devices that are on a battery, like VoIP terminals sometimes, or in this case, you can use higher DTIM value to save a little bit battery life. Or if you work from home, you can try to set that DTIM higher and see how that impacts your phone battery life. So if that value is set to 1, that means the client needs to wake up and listen for a beacon every 100 milliseconds, which is the default setting, and to see whether the access point has any buffered data for the client. If you set the DTIM value to 2, that would mean the client needs to wake up every 200 milliseconds to every second beacon frame. If it's set to 3, every third beacon, every 300 milliseconds, and so on and so forth. We have QBSS load element, which can tell some clients, well, it tells how busy the access point is, how many clients it serves, how many other clients it's serving, and what the channel utilization is on that channel that the access point is on. There are maybe some clients that use that information in a roaming decision, for instance. Like if they see an access point that's really busy serving other clients, the client just looks for another AP. But I'm not sure, what type of, these are probably a certain type of clients that look for that information, so it's not all. Then we got channel width, the RSN field. So these tell us, of course, if the channel bonding is used, and the RSN, the robust secure network field, tells us the encryption and authentication types used on this BSS. So I took an example. So here's a 1 beacon frame. You can see the SSID name, for instance, and pretty much the same things that you saw in the previous slide. So supported data rates, the DTIM values there, the country code, QBSS load elements. We've got HT information here for 802.11n, and so on and so forth. And you can find that under the beacon if you go to open the beacon frame and open the wireless management and the tagged parameters. Here's then a next frame type, probe response or probe frame. It can be response or request coming from an access point. And that's a different way for client devices to get information about access points. So you can, of course, imagine a situation when a user is moving in a building. They can't always wait beacons for 100 milliseconds. That would take too long. So the client can, on demand, request this information from the access point by sending probe request. And that's why it's called active scanning. So the the device goes offline, sends probe request, and then gets the probe response from the IPs on the same channel. So that can happen fast, and then just listening passively on the all channels and wait for the beacons to arrive. So if you look at the content of the probe response, it's almost identical to the beacon frame. And then on the other hand, if you look at the probe request, it's almost identical to the association request. And these probe requests can already be used to identify the client. So the AP gets information from this client who sends the request, and then in response, the access point responds with the probe response, and that gives the information back to the client, about the access point's capabilities. And it's good to be aware that there are two different types of probes. There's directed probe request and null probe request. And that's where the difference is whether the SSID field is defined in the probe request. So in the directed probe it is, but in null probe, it's with the wildcard, so it's not adding the SSID name, meaning all the access point need to respond. So of course, if the SSID field is present in the beacon, in the probe request, there will be less responses coming back from the access points because only the ones belonging to that SSID need to respond. And if you look at how many probe responses there can be in a busy network when client sends the probe request on a channel, there's a lot of APs on the same channel. It can be, almost 20 times higher amount of probe responses compared to probe requests. So on the right-hand side, you see one example. An iPhone sends a probe request on channel 44. We have two access points on channel 44, and both of them need to respond in this case. And that's how the iPhone gets information about these different access points. Next slide is about authentication frame. So that's also a management frame. So this authentication frame is just an open system authentication, the very first step when client wants to connect to an access point and join the network. And this happens before, the pre-shared key and 802.1x authentication. So it's not like a full authentication onto the network. So we are not yet authenticating who the user is, but it's making sure that it's just for the client to inform for the AP that, okay, hey, I would like to join. AP responds, okay, I'm fine with that. Go ahead and let's move on to the association part. And there's a status code in the authentication response, which indicates whether the authentication is successful or not. Fairly simple process, actually. And this is the next step. An association request response is another type of management frame. This is basically where the clients and APs make sure they understand each other, that they both know which data rates each other supports, what channel they are on, is channel channel bonding used, etc. And then if all that is agreed, and then if the association is successful, then the client gets is linked to the AP for the frame transmission through the access point and then to the network. And then at the same time, when the association is successful, the AP establishes association ID or AID for the client that can be used by the BSS, by the AP itself when it needs to send data for the client. So it's about to identify these different devices that are associated to the network. So client can only be associated to one access point at the same time. And if it needs to associate to another AP, it would need to reassociate, which is the roaming part. Again, here's one example. Again, a packet capture. You can see it's for some of you maybe a familiar color coding there in the Wireshark here. If you look at this blue frame, frame number 7, which is the association response, you can see also the source and the destination. In this case, source is a Cisco access point, and destination is Compex, which is actually a Sapphire Eye, something a Sapphire Eye. You can see channel and the RSSI fields. But if you look into the association response and again go under the wireless management fixed parameters, you can find a status code there. So indicating whether the association is successful or not. So in this case, you can see that it's failing. So access point returns denial with the status code set 12, and you can see the reason there. Association did not due to reason outside the scope of this standard, and that means the client needs to join another AP, for instance. So client fails to connect to the AP. So this can be very useful if you need to troubleshoot this, this type of authentication association problems. So look into the reason codes or status codes, why it's failing. Okay, here's another example of different association response status codes. You can see there's code 17, and that equals to association denied because the AP is unable to handle additional associated stations. So you may see that from if load balancing is used, for instance, the client is too busy serving other clients, and it's denying the association of that client so that it would pick another access point. And typically the code 0 is, well, not typically, but the code 0 is always the successful. And you can see most other frames in this case are successful associations. Okay, the next one is reassociation frames, or roaming, probably the more common name, but roaming uses reassociation frames. And if you look at the illustrative image there on the right-hand side, where again we have a phone and it's in move, connected to this or associated to this old access point, and the phone wants to join another access point because the RSSI, the signal strength starts to be on the weak side, -70 dBm, which is typically around the threshold when these devices start to look for better access points. And that's by sending a probe response or probe request to different channels and listening beacons. So in this case, it has already found suitable candidates with -36 dBm signal strength. and wants to move to that access point for keeping the connection stable and better. And it sends a reassociation request to this new access point. And again, the content of the reassociation is almost identical to the association with certain extra elements. Like it's also telling on like current AP address to which access point is it's currently associated to, so that this new access point then knows to negotiate the handover from this old AP to the new AP, which happens then on the Ethernet between these two access points and the controller. But on the radio level, on the PHY level, this reassociation request is sent to the new AP, and then the access point responses with the reassociation response. And again, there's a status code indicator whether the roaming is successful or not. Deauthentication and disassociation frames, another type of management frame. Opposite to authentication, this is just to deauth the client off the network. Of course, when the client is about to leave, it may send the authentication frame to the access point. So it can be either side. It could be from the client to the AP because the client wants to deauthenticate, or it could be from the access point to the client because the AP deauthenticates the client. A couple of examples there. Code 3, the deauthenticator because of leaving station. So if you see that, that's quite common. If the client is about to leave and is already far away from the AP with low signal strength, it may just drop off. Or if you turn off your Wi-Fi, probably also the client also sends the out frame. Another example, code 15, four-way handshake timeouts. This would be if a client is about to join the network, clicks the Wi-Fi icon and selects the SSID, but then doesn't type in the password. That's after a certain period of the time, the access point just sends the deauth frame to the client because it's taken too long, and the client gets deauthenticated, and then it would need to authenticate and associate again. So if a deauthentication frame is sent, it also disassociates the client. So it's also good to be aware of that. And the last management frame type we have here is action frames. These are maybe a little bit less unknown compared to the previous frame types that I just discussed. But like the name suggests, it's action frames are when some information or action is about to happen. So if the access point wants to send or is about to do a certain action and wants to inform clients before doing that, it sends this action frame. And that could be, for example, if the access point is about to change a channel. So you can see a channel switch announcement, and that's example of an action frame. So these frames are either sent by the client or by the access points if if some kind of a action is taking place. And these frames are divided into different categories. I marked them here with this amber color. And under each category, there are these different action codes that actually define what action is going to be performed. And category 0 is, for example, spectrum management. And under category 0, code 4 is channel switch announcement. So here we have one example. This would be neighbor report request and then response coming back from the access point. So this would be when 802.11k is used. So the neighbor reports from the AP that can help then clients to roam. So if you look at the captures here, 117, 118, those are the two frames. So first the client device sends the neighbor report request, and then the access point, Apple access point, is responding to the client with a neighbor report response. And again, if you go into the details of this frame and under the wireless management, go into fixed parameters, you can see the category code there, which is 5, and action code, which is set to 4. But the response is 5. So that's how you can check these different action frames. These are all the different categories. I'm not going to go through all of them here. Spectrum management was one, and under that we had those neighbor reports. Then we have radio measurements, for instance, block acknowledgement. So if a client or AP is about to do a block acknowledgement, it's an action frame, so it informs the AP or client that it's about to happen instead of just a normal acknowledgement frame. QoS, for instance, is one. But yeah, all these are different categories, and under each category there's certain types of actions, action codes. So that gives the which specifies then which action is going to be performed. Okay, that's actually the last slide. Hopefully you learned something new, or if you didn't, then hopefully this worked as a refresher of how these management frames work. And yeah, go back to Heather and Jim for Q&A.
All right, thanks, Tuomas. Nice job. And just one clarification, because block acts are a little tricky. A block act acknowledgement frame is a control frame, like a normal act, but it's the block act add request and the block act delete request and the things that sort of set up the block act, the frame aggregation process, that are action frames. So it's sort of a mixed bag with those.
Yeah, good point.
We got a couple good questions, Tuomas, that came in while you were speaking, and I answered a few already in the Q&A. Couple good questions about what is MFP? Sometimes it's called PMF to confuse us even more. But you talked about how that's management frame protection. Then a couple questions about why association frames are even necessary when probing has a lot of the same fields included. And then yeah, there are a couple questions I didn't answer because I thought they'd be good to answer live. So one of our attendees who wants to remain anonymous asks, why do 5 gigahertz beacon frames show a maximum supported data rate of 54 megabits per second? So obviously we know that in 5 gigahertz, normally we can go much faster than that.
Yeah, so those are only the basic rate, the legacy rates. And then there's a different field that would show you the HT and VHT data rates, like the different MCS indexes, which can then give you a higher data rate.
Yep. And you have the HE fields now as well for the highest data rates in Wi-Fi 6 now.
Mm.
And depending on what the client supports, they'll read those different parts of the beacon because you can imagine an old 802.11n device doesn't know how to interpret the parts of the beacon that are for 802.11ac and AX. So that's why it's kind of divided up that way. And this could be a long one, but we'll try to keep it brief. Another question, another anonymous question. People need to protect their identities, I guess. But what's the use? What is the use of the authentication process? I think he means open system. He or she means the open system authentication process when an AP is configured with WPA authentication.
WPA 1 authentication, I believe, or
yeah, I think it's just either one. Actually, probably a little confused about how open system authentication and
yeah. So the open system authentication takes place every single time, no matter which authentication method is used. Even on like a fully open network, if you're connecting to a free Wi-Fi network in a cafeteria, you'll go through the open system authentication part anyways. So that happens every single time when a client's about to join a Wi-Fi network.
Yeah, it's really a little bit confusing to call it authentication. It goes back to the early days before WPA, when we used WEP and shared key authentication. Those frames actually were more of what you think of as an authentication process. But today they're just used, like Tuomas said, just to say, hello, and I want to connect. And here's my MAC address. And then the AP says, okay, let's go on to the next step, which would be the association process. And then we do what WPA and WPA2 add, either EAP authentication for the, a true authentication, or straight into a 4-way handshake where we verify we have the right passphrase, pre-shared key for those type of, again, real authentication processes. So a little bit of legacy baggage on that process still around. Okay, and I think that's probably a good time to wrap up the Q&A. Nice job, Tuomas. And I'll pass it back to Heather.
Awesome. And I am grabbing the baton to pass simply to Eric. So Eric is joining us for 7 minutes of 7 Signal. So let you take it away, Eric.
All right. My pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you, Tuomas. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Heather. Great stuff as always. Guys, the devil is in the details. And when it comes to Wi-Fi, the details are in the frames. Okay. So let's take a look at 7 Signal here. And let's take a look at the Sapphire Eye. Just give me the thumbs up if you can see my screen now. All right. Okay, so here we go. We're inside the 7 Signal Sapphire system, and there is a frames section, of course, so that we can get all of this rich detail as to what is going on in the air as these frames are zooming around back and forth. So we have our little basic KPI list here where we're looking at retries and airtime utilization. That's all good. Let's go to advanced and take a look around real quick. Okay, so what I've done is I've expanded all of these sections. Now, let me just start scrolling here so that you guys get a flavor of just how vast the detail is. So as you can see, some of these things are checked, some of them are not. Seven Signal is measuring everything that you see on the screen continually. The check mark simply means, do I want to show it or do I want to hide it? So you get all of this all the time. It's pretty awesome. So here we go, guys. Just, take a glance at everything that's available to us. We were talking a lot about management traffic today and how it's important to understand what is going on with regards to that. You can see all of that information is available to you as well. All right, now we get down here into some of the client data rates and the uplink rates and all of that. Now we get into the probing KPIs, as you can see here. And it keeps going and going and going. And then what's really important, obviously, these disassociation and association frames are all here. And authentication frames, deauthentication frames, really important in order to understand what is going on. Why am I getting disconnected or whatnot? All available to you. And it goes on and on and so on and so on. Pretty awesome. Now, guess what, guys? There's more awesomeness coming down the pike. Let me explain. You guys are certainly aware Wi-Fi 6 is here and upon us. And what Seven Signal has been doing back in the shop is inserting more KPIs into the Sapphire system so that we can now measure what is going on from an 802.11ax protocol standpoint. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to zip on over here. All right. So for example, now the basic list includes single user client retries and multi-user client retries. All right. Now let me just open up this and go to advanced and show you some more of the goodies that are in here. All right, so here we go. Here's single user client retries and multi-user. So why is this important? Of course, when we get to Wi-Fi 6, now we're talking about resource units and channel sharing. And so we want to see if this is actually taking place or not. And so we want to be able to measure the retries from one side or the other side of the coin. It gets even better, guys. Check this out. So from an airtime utilization standpoint, not only are we adding in the Wi-Fi 6 frames to come up with a new total airtime utilization calculation for you, but we're also measuring the OFDMA frames that are in the air in both the upload and the download direction. Now, we won't be able to do the download direction until we get our Wi-Fi 6 Sapphire Eye, which is coming later this year. Isn't that right, Jim? The download is it's coming later this year.
Yep, that'll require a new sensor.
That's right. So we're going to have that Wi-Fi 6 radio in there. Nevertheless, we still have it from the other direction. And so we can actually now see, okay, is this taking place? Are my clients actually taking advantage of the protocol or not? And so that's really exciting to be able to see that built right into the system. So it's here for you guys. You know, a lot of people, they're anxiously anticipating, they're waiting for OFDMA, channel sharing, these resource units. Is it actually going to help me realize some kind of return on investment? Seven Signal is going to help you figure that out. So that's what I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed. And remember, we can't see or hear Wi-Fi, but Seven Signal can. And thanks for joining us today and have a great one.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks, Jim. And of course, thanks, Tomas, for an awesome session. And thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your day. It's crazy how fast an hour will fly by when we're talking Wi-Fi. But we will be right here, same time, same place, except I won't be in Boston. So keep an eye out Friday for the announcement. We got Chris Couch speaking next week. I think it's his first session, right, guys?
It is,
Chris Couch's first session. So that's going to be really exciting. So please come sign up, show your support and love for Chris Couch here at Seven Signal, and we will see you there. So thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.